Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Bingle. I'm the director of the DeKalb County Nonprofit Partnership at the DeKalb County Community Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on Epic Fundraising Asks with Dr. Russell James. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, we are recording today's webinar, and that recording will be sent to you by email to anyone who's in attendance today and anyone who registered. In that email, we'll also include the slide deck, so you'll have that as a resource later. We have everyone muted today, but please feel free to use the Q&A and the chat features that you should see on your team's screen. We'll save some time at the end to address questions that you submit. And you can also message me directly if you have questions or if you require technical assistance. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter. It's somebody that we're very excited to feature today. Dr. Russell James is a professor in the School of Financial Planning at Texas Tech University, where he directs the graduate program in charitable financial planning. A nationally recognized leader in the field, Dr. James is a member of the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners Hall of Fame and an honorary fellow of the American College of Trust and Estate Council. Before his academic career, he served as director of planned giving and later as president of Central Christian College, where he led 2 successful capital campaigns, built new facilities, and tripled enrollment. He has authored more than 80 peer-reviewed articles and several influential books, including The Storytelling Fundraiser and Inside the Mind of the Bequest Donor. His work has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Welcome, Dr. James. We appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to sharing with you today some ideas about epic fundraising asks. So we're going to be taking a deep dive into some of the story concepts, but then, of course, I'm a researcher, so I'm going to share with you some of the science, some of the experimental results that we get behind the words that work when it comes to these major fundraising requests or epic fundraising requests. So we're going to look at some lessons from Obi-Wan, Gandalf, and Morpheus. Of course, we'll be sharing the slides, but just in general, I share all my stuff for free. So if you go to encouragegenerosity.com, you will see all of my books there, at least the PDFs for free. If you want to kill some trees, you can go on Amazon, but I do share all of that for free, as well as all of my slide decks, a new podcast that just posted this morning, and everything else. So feel free and take advantage of that at encouragegenerosity.com. So we're going to be looking at some deep dive lessons from Obi-Wan, Gandalf, and Morpheus on how to make the epic fundraising ask. So of course, we're going to go to the movies. Now, when you go to the movies, what will you see? Well, if it's a big blockbuster movie, we'll actually often see the same underlying story. Now, this story is called the hero's journey. It has elements that are universal, actually, across different cultures and lands and times. And one element in that universal story is the universal challenge. That is the call to adventure. Now, at this moment, this is when a prospective hero must choose to either stay in his or her small, self-focused, ordinary world or go on a costly adventure to impact the larger world. Now, that journey will require some sacrifice, but it also promises the hope of a victory. A guiding sage will help that prospective hero along the way. That guiding sage will often introduce the prospective hero to friends and allies, maybe even provide some magical instruments for them to be able to complete the journey. Now, why is this call to adventure so interesting and useful when it comes to the major fundraising request? Well, notice we're actually dealing with all of those same elements. When we are making a challenge to someone to not just make a small convenience gift, but a major life investment gift, we're actually making that call to adventure. And the choice is, well, the donor can stay in his small, self-focused, ordinary world of personal consumption or go on a costly adventure to impact the larger world. It's that same sort of choice that the donor is facing. However, when we are making that presentation, that call to adventure, there's always that hope of a victory, hope of an impact on the larger world. And you might have seen all of these movies and think to yourself, I've seen the Star Wars original movies, the original Matrix and The Hobbit, and I don't remember there being a fundraiser character in any of those. But in fact, there is in every single one. Now, in the universal hero story, that is the guiding sage who challenges the prospective hero with that choice. Not only makes the challenge, but also helps the prospective hero to complete that journey of impact on the larger world, introducing the prospective hero to other friends, to allies and magical instruments. Now, we might call those other donors or professionals that can help with plan giving instruments or gift agreements, those magical instruments that we can use to help the donor make that impact that they're wanting to use. So there are these parallels between this universal hero's journey story and the major gifts fundraising process. And so we're going to be looking at those elements in the effective call to adventure. And then we're going to get super practical on how does this connect with the actual words and phrases that I should use when making a major gift request. So let's dive a little bit more into the story. Of course, ultimately, where does the hero end up? Ultimately, the hero will prevail. He or she will return victorious, bringing a gift to enhance his or her original world. Now, through that journey, the prospective hero's original identity will become a new or enhanced identity. Either externally he may be honored or internally will certainly be transformed. So these are the steps in that universal hero story where the prospective hero on that journey actually goes through an identity change process, actually an identity enhancement process. They are challenged, but that challenge is actually connected to their original identity, their people, their values, or their life story. That's why they say yes ultimately to the challenge after initially saying no. That accepting that challenge leads to a journey that produces a victory, and as a result of that victory, they are personally transformed, resulting in an enhanced identity. Now, the original book that introduced this idea of the monomyth or the universal hero's journey was written by a professor named Joseph Campbell back in the 1940s, called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And his one sentence summary of the core elements of this story goes like this. He says, a hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered. A decisive victory is won, and the hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons or benefits on his fellow man. So this is, to simplify this language from the 1940s, this is a universal story sequence of identity connects to challenge, challenge promises a victory, the victory leads to an enhanced identity. So if you only remember three words, it's identity, challenge, victory. Those are the story elements, and we'll see how those same elements are key to the compelling fundraising ask. So we start with the journey starts with the ordinary world. This is the source of the hero's original identity. Identity comes from the prospective hero's people, values, and life story. Then we come to the ask in the fundraising. This is the challenge. This is the decision to venture forth into the new world. Ultimately, there is a victory. Accepting this challenge results in a victory, and the hero returns with the gift to improve that original world. The journey enhances that world, the source of his people, values, and life story identity, and often his standing within it. This may be public honor, or it could be just private transformation. Now, as I mentioned, one of the central characters in this monomyth hero's journey story is the guiding sage. The guiding sage who challenges the prospective hero to go on this journey and also assist them to complete that journey. Now, in fundraising, advancing the donor's hero story is powerful. But as in every hero story, the journey is launched with a challenge. The fundraising call to adventure, that is the ask, is going to present that same choice. You can stay in the small, self-focused, ordinary world of just personal consumption, or go on a costly adventure to impact the larger world. So the heroic fundraising ask actually will include each story element. Those three words that I want you to remember of identity, challenge, victory as a cycle, that's included. The donor's original identity from his people, values, or life story will inspire accepting the challenge. That is the reason why the prospective hero accepts the challenge. It is because of the prospective hero's original identity from his or her people, values, or life story. It will be a heroic, that is a costly or sacrificial challenge. This is not a mundane choice. This is a major life investment kind of decision. That challenge, however, will come with the promise, at least, of a specific victory. And ultimately, the promised victory will enhance the donor's identity. That is, will protect his or her people or values linked to their identity, improve their external or internal reputation. Now, that's a bit of the theory. I mean, look, folks, I am a professor. I do have to start with theory because that's what I do. But let's get into some of the fun stuff. Let's go to the movies. So what I'm going to do is I want to break apart the fundraising ask scene, that is the challenge scene, call to adventure scene in each of these three kind of epic movies. And then we're going to look at how those same elements work in the challenge scene in a fundraising context that is the major life investment gift. Now, one of the reasons that I want to use these three as examples is, number one, these are the highest grossing movie franchises of their times. The original Star Wars, the original Matrix, the original Hobbit. Now, all of these are classic monomyth stories. And in each, we've got a guiding sage character that delivers the call to adventure. The call to adventure is always the same. Leave behind your small, self-focused, ordinary world. Go on a costly adventure to make an impact for good in the larger world. So again, try to think of these different elements as we're going along here and see how these elements arise when we look at these famous scenes. The guiding sage's identity message will essentially always be the same. And that message is this: take this challenge because of who you are. Now, who you are, your identity, will come from your people, your values, or your life story. Now, that's what we will see at this call to adventure. The challenge is going to be a big ask. It will also be a clear yes or no choice. And finally, it will promise the hope of a victory. Well, for any folks who are on the call who are as old as me, you may actually remember the very first Star Wars movie. And we're going to take a look at the call to adventure. By the way, some of you may be thinking that, putting all of this literary theory on top of these movies, is that really what's going on here? Actually, it is. In fact, in this very movie, Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, was on set advising George Lucas to make sure that those elements were in the movie. So again, we start with this call to adventure. Where does it begin? It begins with the prospective hero's identity. Identity always comes from one's life story, people, and values. And the call begins with the prospective hero's life story. So let's take a look at this opening scene to ultimately leading to the call to adventure from the original Star Wars. And hopefully the audio works on this.
How did my father die?
A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father. Now the Jedi are all but extinct.
So before the big challenge is made, we make the identity connection. In this case, we're starting with the life story connection of the people, the prospective hero's family. The people connections are going to be connected to this challenge. Next, we're going to look at how the prospective hero's values part of his life story are also connected to the challenge that the guiding sage is about to make.
Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
The Force?
And the Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
So we've got those identity connections. What comes next? The challenge. The challenge is going to come, but it will have the promise of a victory. And here's Princess Leia to deliver that challenge.
I have placed information vital to the survival of the rebellion into the memory systems of this R2 unit. My father will know how to retrieve it. You must see this droid safely delivered to him on Alderaan. This is our most desperate hour. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
So now we have the guiding sage who actually makes the call to adventure. And let's listen to what happens in the guiding sage's call to adventure.
You must learn the ways of the Force if you're to come with me to Alderaan.
Alderaan? I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in port as it is.
I need your help, Luke. She needs your help.
I need your help. She needs your help. This is a fundraiser. This is what we do. This is the call to adventure to make an impact on the larger world. The challenge is immediate and clear. Leave behind the small self-focused world of farming in this case. Make an impact for good in the larger world. It is a stark yes or no decision. It is also urgent. The opportunity crisis is now. So this is not a maybe someday decision. This is not a whatever you feel like doing. It is a stark yes or no decision, and it is a now decision. So again, notice the story elements. The challenge links with Luke's identity, his people, his values, his life story. The challenge promises a victory, saving the rebellion. Saving that rebellion links back to his people, the story of who his father was, at least as presented by Obi-Wan Kenobi, his values, the good side of the Force, his life story. Now, the call to adventure is based upon the concept that what is going to motivate the yes? What's going to motivate the yes is the identity connections of the prospective hero. Notice the decision to accept the challenge is not a mathematical cost-benefit analysis. Luke must accept the challenge because of who he is. He must accept the challenge because of his family, his values, and his life story. Let's look at another call to adventure. This is the Hobbit call to adventure that actually begins with just a naked challenge where there are no connections to identity first, but we'll later get into the main challenge. Here we get the call to adventure, right? I'm looking for someone to go on an adventure, and we get turned down. Turns out being turned down is an essential part of the story. The prospective hero always begins by saying no. That's how we know it's a real challenge. It is only later that they are persuaded or circumstances change that they will accept that challenge. So notice what we have here. Gandalf just makes the naked challenge. Bilbo says no. Gandalf is actually unfazed. This initial refusal is a normal part of the monomyth story. Now, notice what happens when Gandalf responds? He's going to respond by pointing to Bilbo's identity connections. That is, the identity reasons that are ultimately going to motivate Bilbo to go on that adventure. In this case, pointing to his mother and his life story. So that is his people and his life story. So let's take a look at that initial presentation. So that is just a little taste of what comes later, which is the actual epic call to adventure. So the call to adventure is a much bigger setup. In the full call to adventure scene, Gandalf brings a large audience to Bilbo's house. Each of them has already committed to the challenge. Their leader explains why his people, his values and life story compelled him to accept the challenge. Now, we call this a campaign dinner, but it's the same idea that we want to create a heroic audience for accepting the challenge. Now, Gandalf lays out the challenge with a map. Now, we call that a proposal document, and that is a quest with enemies and a treasure and the promise of an epic victory. So these are all of those same elements where the challenge will include the promise of a victory, just as it should in our proposal document, whether that includes a map or not. Now, in this call to adventure, notice the challenge will be clear. Leave behind the small self-focused world of the Shire. Go on an adventure to impact the larger world. That challenge is also going to be urgent. The group is leaving in the morning. It's a stark yes or no decision. So notice when we look at the call to adventure in this classic monomyth story, Bilbo resists. What's Gandalf going to do every time Bilbo resists? He will again appeal to Bilbo's identity. So here's an example where we see Bilbo refusing again, and the response to the refusal is again connecting back to Bilbo's life story in this, making that challenge to say, this is who you are. I know your life story. Accepting this challenge is what you're all about. Now he's going to make a later appeal after more resistance from Bilbo to, again, Bilbo's identity. In this case, talking about Bilbo's family history and ancestors. So again, it is an identity connection with the prospective heroes. So notice Bilbo consistently resists with what? Rational cost-benefit analysis. The guiding sage Gandalf consistently responds by focusing on Bilbo's identity connections, the people, the values, and the life story elements that support the prospective hero's decision to accept the challenge. Ultimately, the idea is those identity connections are what is going to compel the prospective hero to say yes. Bilbo must accept the challenge because of who he is. His life story, his adventuresome youth searching for elves, his people, his ancestor who defeated the Goblin King, and an audience of others committed to this same challenge. This Hobbit's call to adventure ultimately leads to what? It leads to an enhanced identity. Not only must Bilbo accept the challenge because of who he is, but the promised victory gives the motivation of accepting the challenge because of who he will become. The promised victory will lead to an enhanced identity. And we get this reference in this same challenge scene. So notice the connection to a changed identity as part of the process. Like the epic fundraising ask, this call to adventure makes a clear challenge. It links the prospective hero's identity to that challenge. That challenge is going to promise a victory, and that victory will promise an enhanced identity. Now, before we get into some of the really practical ways that we want to phrase our major, how we want to phrase our major fundraising gift requests, well, we've got to end with perhaps the most famous challenge scene, and that is the Matrix call to adventure, taking the red pill or the blue pill. But before we get to that challenge, notice that we'll look at some of those connections. So first, let's start with the epic challenge scene here.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Ah, what happened? Who knows? Well, you'll have to watch the movie, right? The challenge is clear. Leave behind the ordinary world or go on an adventure down the rabbit hole. It is urgent. Notice the phrase, this is your last chance. It is a stark yes or no decision. Just before this challenge, however, as in all of the other scenes, Morpheus focuses on Neo's identity and life story. So again, the reason that the person is going to accept the challenge is because of their identity, because of who they are. So let's pick up that preceding scene to see how this connects.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
So notice the connection here. Morpheus reveals Neo's identity as a lifelong prisoner. It is this identity that compels Neo to take the challenge. Unless he takes the challenge, his identity will not change. Again, the epic challenge elements are the same. It is a stark yes or no decision with a deadline. The guiding sage presents a heroic challenge. It is a stark yes or no choice. There is no just a little bit option. There is no maybe someday option. So when we look at the epic challenge elements, again, we're always trying to connect the identity as the motivation for saying yes. The choice is not just a matter of statistically analyzing pros and cons. The guiding sage shows the identity elements, life story, people, and values that support taking the challenge. The ultimate message that's being delivered here in each case is this: you are the kind of person who accepts a challenge like this. Now, that idea of the epic call to adventure actually includes the full story cycle. The hero's identity compels accepting the challenge. Identity connects to challenge. The challenge will promise a victory. The challenge leads to the victory. And finally, the victory is personally meaningful because of the hero's identity. Now, we've been looking at a lot of movie scenes. We've been talking about a lot of literary theory, but I haven't gotten to how do we ask for the big gift. So let's get to that now. We can actually, in 3 sentences, include these same story cycle elements. We can do this in the story cycle fundraising ask. We can have sentence number 1 that connects the donor's identity with the challenge. Sentence number 2 that shows how the promised victory connects back to their identity. And sentence number 3 that makes the challenge and shows how that challenge leads to a promised victory. So we're going to phrase those the exact same ways in each example we're getting ready to look at. We're going to start with the identity statement. You have. Here we're going to describe a connection with the donor's identity. Then we're going to look at the victory statement, how that connects back to identity. You understand. And here we're going to describe how the victory would be meaningful to the donor. And we will end with the challenge phrase itself, but that challenge phrase is going to include the promise of a victory. Would you consider a gift of blank dollars to, and here you're going to describe the promised victory. Let's jump into some real world fundraising examples of this for different kinds of organizations. So let's look at this story cycle fundraising ask. Sentence number 1. You have changed so many lives through your support of our job training programs. Just as your mother liked to say, giving people a hand up, not a handout. Sentence number 2. You understand how this new technology center could provide real opportunities for young people who start out with nothing but a willingness to work hard, just like you did. Sentence number 3. Would you consider a gift of $100,000 as one of our leadership level donors to help transform our community in this way? So notice with these 3 sentences, we have made the full story cycle fundraising ask. We begin by connecting their identity with the challenge. We continue by connecting the promised victory back to their identity. And we end by making a challenge phrased in a way that it is clear what victory is promised if they accept this challenge. Let's look at another example. Sentence number 1. Well, I've got to give you this example. I'm here at Texas Tech University, and for those of you that follow college athletics, you will know that we are recently in the business of finding out just what money can buy when it comes to softball and now football. And so I thought I would include in one of those examples. So, sentence number 1. You have meant so much to this football program since your days as a player over 30 years ago. Sentence number 2. You understand how this new stadium expansion would launch our program onto the national stage. Sentence number 3. Would you consider a gift of $2 million to lead the campaign to make this a reality? So again, notice we are hitting these same story elements. We begin with how their identity connects with the challenge, in this case, connecting to their younger days. We continue with how the promised victory affects their identity, the impact that it would have, and with their connection to the program, how that connects to them. And we end with a specific yes or no challenge that promises a victory. Let's look at another example. We begin with a sentence that connects the donor's identity with the challenge. You have been so dedicated to improving the lives of patients at this hospital, going back even before your own father received care here. We then continue with how the promised victory connects to the donor's identity. You understand how this new campaign against cancer can change the lives of so many right here in our community. Notice that our community, this is our people, our people, my people, that is an identity connection. And finally, we end with how the challenge promises a victory. Would you consider a gift of $100,000 to help fund next year's screening clinics? Another example from a university context, and then we'll look at some experimental results as well after this. So from this is from a camping context. Sentence number 1. You have been well known in this community as an advocate for our youth summer camps. Their identity connects to the challenge. Sentence number 2. You understand how camp scholarships can change the lives of young people, giving them a chance to learn and grow just as you did in your youth. The promised victory connects back to their identity. Sentence number 3. Would you consider a gift of $50,000 to create the Smith Family Permanent Endowed Scholarship Fund to give that opportunity to future generations of campers? The challenge, which is specific and a specific yes/no decision, has the promise of a personally meaningful victory. Now, one last thing I want to point out before we move on. This last example is the first one where we were actually fully funding the promised victory. They're creating their own endowed scholarship. Notice with the previous ones, it is an amount to help fund next year's screening clinics or an amount to lead the campaign to make this a reality or to be one of our leadership level donors to help transform our community in this way. I just point this out because these kinds of asks do not have to be limited to asks in which the entire project is being funded by that one ask. So let's look at some research examples on how those might connect to some of these story elements that we've been talking about. And I'm going to switch gears here by asking a little bit of a weird question. So this is the question of what job titles for fundraisers work best for donors. To give you a little bit of background, especially when it comes to the area of planned giving, I noticed that people had all kinds of job titles. And so I thought, let's test these things and see which of these are more effective from a donor perspective. And so the way we tested these is 4 different scenarios on major gifts of assets, stocks, real estate, also a gift in a will, also a gift annuity. And with each scenario, we gave people 13 different job titles from people working at the nonprofit, and then we asked them to rate. In this scenario, who at the charity are you more likely to contact? And they could rate that job title from I would definitely contact that person all the way to I would never contact that person. Now, in total, we tested 71 different job titles. Now, to keep the comparison clean, we actually converted all the titles to a chief something officer or a director of something. So that way, everything is compared on an equal basis with the other job titles. And so let's look at the first scenario. The first scenario was this. Suppose you receive $100,000 in corporate stock from a relative. You're considering gifting some of these shares to a large charity, but you want to do it in a way that saves the most taxes. Who at the charity are you more likely to contact? Now, when we, instead of giving you all 70 or 60 some sets of results, I'm just going to give you the best 10 titles and the worst 10 titles. So notice some things about the best 10 titles. We get words such as planning, advising, guidance. These are all titles that basically communicate I'm here to help the donors. Notice what the worst 10 titles were. Basically the titles that we all use: advancement, development, institutional advancement. Now, I've given you the best 10 and the worst 10, but I want to give you a flavor for how big this difference is when people are responding. So if we use a traditional title like Director of Advancement, 7% are saying, I would definitely contact that person for a gift of stock. As we use something more that I'm here to help donors, like Director of Donor Advising, we now more than triple the share of people who say, yes, I would definitely contact that person. We get similar results from Chief Donor Relations Officer, basically just communicating, I'm here to help. Now, in the next scenario, we ask this. Suppose you own some real estate and you're thinking about giving part of it to a charity, but you want to do it in the right way. Who at the charity are you more likely to contact? Now, notice in this scenario, we changed it a bit because in the previous one, we asked, you want to do it in a way that saves the most taxes. We didn't ask that in this scenario. Now we just say you're thinking about giving part of it to a charity, but you want to do it in the right way. So let's look at our best 10 and our worst 10. So best 10 titles, well, things that specifically reference real estate or use the word estate, but also more generic ones like Chief Donor Relations Officer, ones that use terms including planning. When we look at the worst 10 titles, again, advancement, development, institutional advancement. By the way, I'm particularly proud of number 10. The Chief Donor Ombudsman Officer, because that's not a real title. I made that up. I made it up because I thought it was dumb and it would not work. So I'm really happy that my title made it into the bottom 10. I'm a little disappointed that I have not yet demonstrated sufficient intellectual capacity to be able to construct a title that is worse than what we're all using, but I'm working on it. The next scenario was you read a newspaper article about a plan where you can receive a tax deduction and make a gift that pays you income for life. Who at the charity are you more likely to contact to ask about this? Again, when we look at the worst 10 titles, it's all the usual suspects: advancement, development, institutional advancement. When we look at the titles that work the best, we've got advising, planning, donor advising, planning, and basically I'm here to help donors. Even donations consultant showed up on that one. The final scenario is this: suppose you're getting ready to write a new will. You're considering including a charity, but you want to use the right language for the gift. But you want to use the right language for the gift. Who at the charity are you more likely to contact? Somebody looks like that sounds like they've lost the audio. Hopefully that's not a general issue there. And again, what do we get? We get the same in the worst 10 titles, but when we look at the best 10 titles, those that specifically reference the gift, so words like estate, but also those that are referencing advising, planning, guidance. So let's combine all of these, all 4 scenarios combined. Who at the charity are you most likely to contact? Now, I want to point out 2 important things about this combined list. One, if you are frankly just sick and tired of donors hassling you all of the time because they want to make gifts of stocks and real estate and put you in their will, I've got the solution. Just be a director of advancement or development. It is it's great armor against those kinds of inquiries. By the way, so I have to share a story because part of this process was I was giving away free copies of my book. And if you got the book, then you had to give me your business card. This was at the National Gift Planning Conference. And of course, people thought, well, of course, yeah, I'm going to do this, then you're going to spam me with stuff that you're selling, except I don't sell anything. I'm just a professor. They were actually part of the experiment. I wanted to collect all of these job titles. And so I was talking with somebody at the conference about, oh, I'm, doing this, collecting job titles. And she shared an interesting story with me. She said, oh, I had to get my job title changed. Really? What was that scenario? She said, well, I do data analytics for donor evaluation for our frontline fundraisers, but they had given me a title of donor relations officer. And because of that title, I'd get phone calls from people that were wanting to make a gift, and it was like, yeah, but that's not what I do. So I got my job title changed. So we fixed that problem. Sorry. So now, what in the world does this all have to do with storytelling? Notice every one of these best titles that donors are most likely to contact a person. Notice what they have in common. They're describing a role of planning, advising, guidance. Let's go back to the universal hero's journey story. That is precisely the role of the guiding sage. In whatever story that you look at this guiding sage character, and we just looked at 3 of them, but for those of you that recognize the other movies on there, you'll recognize this same guiding sage character. What does the guiding sage do? Provides guidance, advice, planning. The notion is that these universal story elements are something that humans universally are attracted to. And when we are fulfilling or even claiming to fulfill that role in the donor's journey, it's attractive, right? So that role is to provide guidance, advice, and planning. May involve delivering magical instruments to help in the hero's journey to make an impact on the larger world. May involve introducing the hero to friends and allies who can also help to complete this journey of impact. So I hope you see kind of the underlying elements, how these things are connecting with what really works. Now, one of the things that we want to mention is we want to mention the donor's identity. We want to communicate this core message that is what? It is people like me make gifts like this. Okay, that is the whole translation of that first step of the identity connects to the challenge in a fundraising context. We want the donor to think people like me make gifts like this. Now, in the broader context, this is people like me accept challenges, accept heroic challenges like this. That's what we saw in all of our Guiding Sage challenge scenes. But in a fundraising role, it is people like me make gifts like this. So let's get practical. How big of an impact can this make? Well, in this particular set of research, 3,000 testators were going through their normal process of completing their will documents. Now, unbeknownst to them, they were randomly assigned to one of three groups. One got the standard estate planning questions, no particular reference to charity. One got one extra question, would you like to leave any money to charity in your will? And one got that extra question with a social norm statement. Many of our customers like to leave money to charity in their will. I know there's a second half of that, but that actually didn't have any effect on the results. I tested both of those separately. This was the difference in the share of people who actually included charity in their real will documents. Notice first, just being asked the question, we're now doubling the share who are including actual gifts to charity in their will documents. And if we ask that question with a social norm statement, many of our customers like to leave money to charity in their will. Now we are tripling the share of real people leaving real gifts in their actual will documents. Not only are we tripling that, but in this experiment, the average gift size to charity was double in that third category. So this one sentence makes a six-fold effect on their gifts in wills. Now, this particular study was done in England, so I went ahead and replicated this in a US group, and we saw the same concepts. If we just ask people about making a gift to charity in my will, 23% are interested now in doing that. But if we begin with the idea that people like you make gifts like this, many people like to leave a gift to charity in their will, we now get a higher level of interest just from that one sentence. And now you may notice there that we get a lower level of interest when we use the term bequest gift. Basically, that is a universal result we get whenever we use more complex or legal contract type language to describe any kind of plan giving instrument. When we initially introduce it, we're going to get worse results. And so that's the notion there. So we're talking about making this fundraising challenge, the epic fundraising challenge. Now, in story, the prospective hero is always going to face a stark choice. This is a yes or no decision. In fundraising, this means asking for a specific amount. Now, notice the actual Gandalf in the story is, I'm looking for someone to go on an adventure, right? It's a big ask. Now, what we wouldn't want to see Gandalf doing is to make an ask that sounded like this. Well, any time you could spend going outside of the Shire for just a little bit would be helpful. You know, any way that you could help a little would be nice. No. That is not a heroic call to adventure. And when we make a fundraising request as a request of convenience, we're not following the story rules. It actually does have to be a challenge that is a heroic challenge in order to be a meaningful one. Now, if we're going to ask for a specific amount, that makes it a little difficult. It makes it difficult because we have to say how much. Now, in story, the heroic decision is going to be difficult. The challenge is going to be hard. In fundraising, a heroic donation is not a quick and easy choice. To make a meaningful story in the donor's life story, the gift itself must be a meaningful amount. The heroic donation is what we might call a sacrificial gift. It is going to be a stretch gift. So how do we deal with this from a practical perspective? Well, we begin with the story concept. And the story concept is we want to make a heroic challenge. That's what makes it a meaningful story for the donor's life story. Allows the donor to have that meaningful level of impact. All hero stories require 100% of the hero's capacity. So if we can estimate donor capacity, then we can estimate what is that heroic amount. If we don't have the back office to sort of estimate donor capacity, we could guess. A major gift is typically 10 to 25 times regular annual giving. Or we could present a menu. We can share stories of other gifts and note the reaction. So for example, if we are talking about let's say funding and outreach program for whatever the case may be, we could say, that this amount of money is what it takes to fund this entire program for one day. This is what it costs to fund for a month. To pay for an entire year is this amount, and a permanent named endowment is this amount, right? So the idea is that we are presenting at different levels, and we see what of those levels seem to be the right impact level for that donor. But all hero stories ultimately require the 100% of the hero's capacity. So what is the worst amount? Well, it is this. Give what you can, anything helps. This won't inspire a major gift because it's not a heroic challenge. It's begging. That's not what we're talking about here. This is not a call to adventure. That's just a call to convenience. If you ask in that way, it's a mundane choice in a mundane story. That's not going to provide meaningful impact to anyone's life. That's not what we're talking about. Also notice that in the Epic Fundraising Challenge, there is a heroic audience in many cases. In this particular example, we see peers or aspirational peers who have already pledged. That's a great audience. It creates this community. People like us make gifts like this. Just like in the scene from The Hobbit, they can share why they have accepted the challenge. They can create a donor community of fellow adventurers. Notice one of the core roles of the heroic, of the guiding sage, not only to make that challenge, but also to introduce the prospective hero to friends and allies that can help them complete the journey. So again, the audience members are there because they create the community. But I would caution on one thing. If you want to invite other people in, very good idea. But they do not fulfill the role of the guiding sage who challenges with a heroic choice. That's your job. Their job is to be there and talk about why they have accepted the challenge. So Holly Million puts it this way, after talking about why they have accepted the challenge, she writes, at this time, the board member should pretend to be a deer caught in the headlights. No motion, no comments. The temptation will be great to break the silence and reduce the awkwardness, but everyone needs to shut up. So notice what we're talking about here. Yeah, we want that audience in. Let's bring that board member in. Let's bring that influential peer in, but they do not make the fundraising request. And they don't interfere with the fundraising request, right? They don't break the silence after the request is made. So the idea here is ultimately we're trying to advance the donor's hero story, what we call the hero's journey. Now, we call it a hero story not because the person in the story is a hero, but because at the end of the process, they complete a heroic journey. Knowing the full story cycle can lead to a better ask, and it can lead to a better follow-up. Notice that in each of these cases, a no is not the end of the story. It's a normal step in the hero's journey. The yes often comes later. That will A no gives us an opportunity to find out what was missing from the story. Is this a compelling project for them? Would other projects be more compelling? Is this a difficult time for them? What might there be a later time where financial circumstances could change? Are there other financial needs that are preventing them from accomplishing this goal? That it's something they want to do, but they're just financially not in a great situation for it. Hey, that's what plan giving is all about, is providing solutions as the guiding sage to allow that prospective hero to complete their heroic journey of impact. Not only that, this is really important, a yes is not the end of the story. The charity must still complete the story, deliver that victory, deliver that experience of an enhanced identity. None of these movies, after we have that epic challenge scene and the initial no, and then the continuation of the scene followed by the acceptance of the call to adventure, none of those movies end after the prospective hero says yes, right? In the same way in our fundraising, we've got to complete the journey. Otherwise, the next time we ask, they know this is not going to be a very interesting story. So advancing the donor's hero story does require the call to adventure. The elements of the effective call to adventure are also elements in the effective ask. The ideal challenge is going to link to the prospective hero's past identity. That challenge is going to promise a future victory, and the promised victory will result in an enhanced identity, private meaning, or perhaps even public reputation. Now, one of the things to keep in mind about making your fundraising request using this story cycle request is that you actually have to have information about the donor in order to make this request. What I mean by that is if you go into the meeting and you're getting ready to say, okay, I need to start with my sentence that connects their identity to the challenge that I will be making. And you start trying to do that and you realize, wait, I don't know how their people or their values or their life story is connected to the ask I'm about to make. You're not ready to make a story cycle ask, right? You need to have more conversations with the donor. Or maybe you get ready to write your second sentence about how this victory will be personally meaningful because of its connection to the donor's people, values, and life story. And again, you realize that you don't know why it's personally meaningful to the donor. Guess what? You can't make the story cycle ask. Or if you're just asking for money, but you're not actually saying what the victory, the promised victory would be as a result of that, you're not ready to make the story cycle ask. So in some ways, that story cycle ask is foolproof, because if you can't make that kind of ask, it's not time to make the epic or heroic challenge. And so again, when we look at these story elements, advancing the donor's hero story requires a guiding sage. It is this guiding sage character who challenges with a heroic choice. Now, who is that guiding sage character? Yes, it's Obi-Wan. Yes, it's Gandalf. Yes, it's Morpheus, but it's also you. So when we make this compelling ask, this call to adventure, it can be scary, right? Look, being social is fun, but asking for money, for many people, that's hard. Many fail simply by avoiding this critical step. It helps to practice these phrases to become more comfortable with them. Now, again, these are the elements of this universal hero story. Mentioned them before, and what we're talking about in this universal hero story is this second step. The second step is the fundraising ask, the call to adventure. It is the time when the prospective hero is faced with a challenge in the story. The secret to a compelling fundraising ask is to use that full story cycle. So as I mentioned before, if you can't create a fundraising ask for this specific donor that includes these three elements in these three sentences, you're not ready. So again, just to give you a bit of a flavor for it, here's some other examples of how we can make this 3-sentence story ask. You have been a friend of this library for over 20 years. You understand how a new regional history collection would preserve our shared heritage. Would you consider a gift of $50,000 to lead this campaign to make this a reality? Now, notice also when you know that the ultimate destination for the conversations is going to be this story cycle ask, it also frames the kinds of questions that you will be asking in your conversations with donors. So, what kind of questions do we want to ask? Well, we want to ask about connections that will help us frame sentence number 1. So tell me, how did you get interested in this cause? Why does what we do interest you? Tell me a little bit about your connection with this organization. Now, the reason that we're asking that is, number 1, we can elicit that information that is going to go into our story cycle ask, but also we're helping the donor to tell that story about themselves. Way more powerful than when we say the story is if we get them to say the story. And then for sentence number 2, we might ask them questions about, hey, if money were no object, what kind of an impact would you like to have on this cause or at this organization? You know, what's the most meaningful thing that you could accomplish with your money related to this cause? So again, what are we trying to do there? Well, we're just asking questions, trying to get them to identify their most compelling fundraising victory. Because once we learn about, oh, this is the kind of victory that really connects in with their identity. Yeah, tell me about that impact. Why is that impact meaningful to you? What causes you to be compelled by that? Now we are pulling out those story elements. So the idea is that if we know where we're going, and this is where we're going, identity, challenge, victory, connection, to make this ask, it frames all of our conversations so that we're not just randomly talking, being social, being friendly. That's all fine. That's all good. But we're actually acting as the guiding sage, always thinking about that hero's perspective journey and where they are ultimately going. So again, another example here, identity connects to challenge. You have done so much to improve care for others since your own diagnosis with breast cancer. Victory connects to the identity. You understand more than anyone how lives could be changed by offering free early screening. Would you consider a gift of $100,000 to help fund next year's screening clinics? Or this one, you have always had such a heart for supporting the arts in our community. That's connecting their identity, people, values, life story, to the challenge. Sentence number 2, you understand how this new exhibition could make a real impact for other art lovers like you in our whole city. Would you consider a gift of $50,000 as our lead campaign donor to make this happen? And as I give you this last example, I want to tell you how people mess this up. Not this particular example, but this concept. You mess it up when you just try to wing it. People that just try to wing it will use too many words. We want this to be short. Max out at Marcy Heim suggests 17 words as a max. You want to actually draft it. You want to practice it. You want to say it. Say it to a neighbor. Say it to someone else. How does it make them feel? How do they connect? It's like shooting a basketball. You just need some practice so that when you're doing it, boom, 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 you're ready to go. We don't want to be riffing on this stuff. This is important. We want to have the phrases ready to go and comfortable. You've been such a loyal alumnus of this department since you graduated years ago. You understand how important scholarships are in helping others like you become proud alums of the future. Would you consider a gift of $100,000 to fund a permanent name scholarship, giving students the chance for an education? Now, again, one of the reasons why I keep coming back to, if you remember just the 3 words, identity, challenge, victory, and that story cycle, is that if you have that in place, then it can make your ask and your conversations leading up to the ask foolproof, right? You can't make the story cycle ask if you don't know the donor story. If you don't know how the donor story or values connect to the challenge, step number 1 can't happen. If the ask doesn't promise some specific visualizable, personally meaningful impact, step number 3 can't happen. If you don't know why that gift's impact would be meaningful for the donor, step 2 is impossible. So if we remember simply those 3 words, challenge, identity, victory, it can help in our conversation, because this is not just about the phrase we use at the ask itself. It's understanding that the hero's journey is not a one-shot story. It's a continuing, repeated cycle. And effective fundraising uses this identity, challenge, victory cycle again and again. It uses that like a tightening spiral over time. How do we elicit these connections? Well, link number 1, we want to learn how their identity is connected to the challenge that we are going to make. Tell me about your connection to this charity. How has this cause been important in your life? Have others in your life been affected by this cause? We're being social, we're being conversational, but we're also being the guiding sage in the donor's heroic journey. For link number 2, what would you like to accomplish with your giving that would be meaningful to you? If the sky were the limit, what would you change at this organization? Again, we're trying to uncover what are those compelling, what is that most compelling victory for the donor? Now, I know some people, they would look at, a question like this last one and say, oh, what would you change at this organization? I don't ever want to ask a donor that, because they might say something that we're not going to do. Ask the question. If the donor wants to do something ridiculous that you would never do, that is super important to know, because then you're going to ask about, so tell me about that. What leads you to want to do things in this way? And you know what that's going to do? It's going to uncover their values. What is important to them? Why is that important to them? And you, as the expert on your organization, can understand how to then connect those values with other possible feasible things that are happening within your organization. So again, it is the idea of thinking of this as this continual spiral, this leading to that 3-sentence ask, the compelling challenge. Each answer makes the story circle a little clearer. It helps the fundraiser to pinpoint that compelling challenge. And as we are having these conversations, and we know it's ultimately going to that epic fundraising request, what is the penultimate step? That is the next to the last step. Well, we often call that a proposal. And what are the elements of a good proposal? Same elements, same story elements. That proposal is going to include the donor's connection to the cause, the charity, or the project. Here is why you care. It's going to paint a clear picture of the victory. Here is the outcome. And it's going to show how the challenge leads to the promised victory. Here is what your gift will do. And then, of course, ultimately, when we get to that story cycle ask, which takes less than a minute, especially if you do it right, it's going to be, each sentence is going to be short, and it's going to be practiced so that you can do it smoothly and not start stumbling across each one. Even in that most condensed final form, still has every story element. It's still going to make those links, link number 1, link number 2, and link number 3. The guiding sage is this inherently attractive role that a fundraiser can fulfill. It is an archetypal character in the hero's journey. What is our role as the guiding sage who challenges with the choice? Doesn't end when a person responds to the ask. We, along the full journey, will provide guidance, advice, and planning. We provide magical instruments to the hero, whether that be plan giving instruments, gift agreements, endowments, scholarships, fellowship, or whatever that might be. We're going to introduce the hero to friends and allies, maybe other donors, maybe other technical experts that, again, all of them are helping the donors to complete that journey. And we're often going to present that call to adventure, challenging the donor with that heroic choice. So the fundraiser is the guiding sage in the donor hero's journey. The nonprofit is the donor's what? Magical instrument of impact. It is the donor's magical instrument used to achieve a compelling victory. The guiding sage fundraiser challenges with a heroic choice. coming alongside the donor to provide guidance, advice, and planning. Now, notice how this major life investment gift story is different than the small gift story. In the small gift story, who's the hero? The hero is the nonprofit. Look at how wonderful we are. Look at how much of an impact that we are making. You should give money to us because we are so wonderful. That's a small gift story. That's not a major life investment gift story. Now, the nonprofit is still really important in the donor's hero's journey, but the nonprofit is not the hero. The nonprofit is the magical instrument of impact that the donor picks up and uses to accomplish the personally meaningful victory. Think of it this way. The nonprofit is like the hammer of Thor. The hammer of Thor is really impressive, but the hammer's not the hero. The hammer is a magical instrument of impact, which the hero picks up and uses to make that impact. Now, when we fulfill this role of the guiding sage in the donor hero's journey, it can be helpful to answer a lot of small detailed questions. Like, for example, what about physical positioning at the ask? The guiding sage fundraiser comes alongside the donor. This is a relationship where we want to come alongside the donor because we are the guiding sage. If we're facing directly across the table, well, that is a traditional conflict or negotiating position. So we want to soften this angle. Ideally, we use a table corner. If we can't use a table corner, then we use a focus object, such as a proposal document. Why? Because we're trying to merge, to come alongside, because that's what the guiding sage character does, to physically come alongside, to act as that guide or advisor. Now, notice the guiding sage fundraiser comes alongside the donor. This focus object, say a proposal document, creates a triangle. So it shifts away from that parallel or conflict position to an angled or merging position. So we walk through the proposal. You are going to hold the proposal. You are going to turn the pages, marking, circling, underlining. Why? Because it's creating this merging physical posture where you are what? You are advising. You are explaining. You are guiding. What do you not do? You do not say, here, have the proposal. Because if the donor takes that proposal document, the fundraiser loses the physical position of the guiding advisor. Now, the donor can just interact with the document. Bad things happen. That is not the role that we are fulfilling here. There's other ways that we can fulfill this same physical positioning as the guiding sage. A fundraiser might walk alongside a donor, pointing to where a project would take place. The focus object might be a room or a field or a building. There isn't just one magic position, but there is a magic story. That's the donor's hero's journey, where the fundraiser is the guiding sage who comes alongside to provide advice, planning, guidance. So as we lead up to the ask, donor experiences can confirm each link in this cycle. How do we help the donor observe their connection between their identity and the challenge? Increasing donor involvement with the charity's work and their people, expressing gratitude for and reminding donors of their past support. This is what they have been doing, referencing others like the donor who have made this commitment. As we're leading up to the ask, donor experiences can confirm the other links in the story cycle. How do we confirm that link between the challenge and the promised victory? Well, we can demonstrate the donor's past impact. Hey, here's how you have used this magical instrument of impact that is our nonprofit organization to make a difference in the past. When we go through and complete that story cycle, it makes the next gift's impact even more clear. And then finally, we can have donor experiences that can confirm the link between the promised victory and the donor's identity. That is, their values, life story, and people. We can make the victory more visualizable and emotionally relevant. We can reference others aligned with the donor who also support the cause. We can show how the promised victory matches the donor's life story and values. So the answer, well, the answer is story. Look, The lead-up techniques are limitless, but they ultimately are going to advance this donor's hero's journey. They're going to advance that story through this cycle of those 3 words. I know I've been sharing lots of different stuff with you. It's just 3 words: identity, challenge, victory. Identity connects to the challenge. The challenge promises a victory. That victory is personally meaningful because it connects back to the donor's identity. Now, a bad ask, what is it going to do? A bad ask is going to violate the story. It might violate the guiding sage's role, or it might skip a link in the story. It maybe won't connect to the donor's original identity. It won't connect the challenge to their identity. Or maybe it's not going to be a heroic challenge. Or maybe we don't make a challenge at all. We're just friendly and social, but we never fulfill that role of the guiding sage who challenges with a heroic ask. It won't promise a victory, or it will promise a victory, but something that doesn't connect in with the donor's identity. That's what a bad ask does. It's bad because it violates or leaves out some of the story cycle. It is missing out on those core call to adventure scenarios. Well, folks, that's been a bunch of information thrown at you about the epic fundraising ask, the stories and science behind the words that work. I do want to mention to you that I share all of my stuff for free, includes all my slide decks, all of my books, even a new podcast series that just put up there today at encouragegenerosity.com. Or if you're on LinkedIn, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I can send you the links that way as well. But do take advantage of that because I am always happy to share. Well, I did want to leave some time at the end in case there are some thoughts, comments, questions, snide remarks, whatever comes to mind. Feel free and jump in. You're welcome to unmute yourself, type in a question into the chat, Q&A. Happy to talk about anything you want to hear about in our last few minutes.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Dr. James. I have received a few questions to me directly, and so I'll communicate those for now. But yes, to echo what Dr. James said, if you have additional questions, please submit them now. So this shifts the frame a little bit to focus on annual appeals. So this person asked, what guidance do you have for year-end appeals, not necessarily planned or major gifts, but lower dollar requests from a broad group of people?
So I'll give you a clean example. This was one that was done. There were, I think, 7 different groups. We're talking, tens of thousands of campaign letters going out for an appeal. And they were looking at what headlines were the most effective. And it was interesting because the most effective headline was campaign donor for blank years. Your largest gift was blank dollars. Now, notice what that headline does. First, when it says campaign donor for blank years, what is that communicating? You're the kind of person that makes gifts like this. You have been with our organization making these kinds of gifts for this many years, right? So we begin with the identity connection. Even if we don't know anything else about them, we know that they have had this life history. They are the kind of person who makes a gift like this. And then the interesting thing is when you add on that your most generous gift was X dollars, right? Just pull that from their file, okay? We can do a merge. It's easy to do, right? What is that doing? It is setting an amount that, what's the first thing you think about? Could you do more than that, right? Could you have a gift that is greater than that? So we are both connecting with the identity. And we're making that larger challenge feel more that it's the sort of thing that they do. There's another way that we can do this, maybe not in a direct mail setting, but we also have the same result experimentally, that if you describe someone as a donor who gives, let's say, $100 a month. I say, Ben, it's wonderful. You've been supporting this organization for several years, and you give at $100 a month. Really appreciate that. Would you consider a gift of $3,000? That doesn't seem to fit, does it? Right? But if instead I said, You know, Ben, you've been supporting us for over 3 years. Did you know that you've given over $3,600 to support this organization? Here's a project for $3,000 that I think you might be interested in. Okay, notice that difference, that now we're communicating that this kind of epic fundraising request, even though it's big, you're the kind of person who makes gifts like this, right? But I've communicated that in a way that shows how you are a $3,000 donor kind of person. You've already given us $3,600, right? Whereas if I say you give us $100 a month, how about a $3,000 gift? That's a mismatch. I'm not communicating that you are the kind of person who makes gifts like that.
Yep. Thank you. Hopefully that gives them a little food for thought and some things to ponder as they get ready for their annual appeal. A few more questions. Can you elaborate on some of the most dire mistakes you see fundraisers make? Basically, what do you recommend we never do? And that picks up on one of the slides as you were concluding of things, not to do. If this person's just wondering if there's anything else, maybe beyond the scope of what you talked about today.
Yeah, I think the things are the standard things. They're all violations of the story. So, for example, we know hopefully your first day of fundraising, somebody told you what to do after the ask, which is to shut up, right? Because if you don't, then what are you going to want to do? You're going to want to back away from that ask, right? And so all of a sudden, you're not fulfilling that role of being the guiding sage who comes alongside to make that epic challenge. Now it's, or if you can do less, that we understand, that no, that's not the role, right? And so I think the mistakes are basically story mistakes, right? The idea of what's missing from this story. The biggest story mistake, it's real simple. It is to end the story at the ask. The idea of we're not going to fulfill the rest of the story. We're not going to take the time to make sure the donor experiences that personally meaningful victory. We're not going to take the time to make sure that the donor feels like they have experienced an internal transformation, that they've really made an impact, or external. Others are recognizing the kind of impact that they have made, that we just make the ask and we never finish the story. We just come back and make the other ask. Well, nobody wants to watch another movie if it ends at the ask, right? So fulfilling that donor gratitude, that donor impact reporting, you've got to complete the full story if you then want to come back to make that request again.
Your website references biblical fundraising. How does biblical fundraising differ from traditional fundraising methods, and what lessons can modern fundraisers use from that model?
Yeah, so the premise of that study is that basically these ideas that we're looking at that are test most effectively in major gifts fundraising, that they're not new. People are people. 2,000 years ago, we can look at some of the exact same strategies, the same communication methodologies. And when we actually look at the language, we see these same things, that the high capacity donors are being described as the actors who make the impact. They are actually the main characters in the story, and they are the ones who are making the impact, accomplishing the different goals. And so it's basically the idea of saying this is not new, that in the same way that with the universal hero story, we would say these are universal elements. We see that with things that are 2,000 years old that we can pull out of scripture, that it's basically, look, this is how major gifts works. It's how it worked 2,000 years ago. It's how it still works today, that it includes these same story elements.
Jessica has a question in the Q&A. Really helpful information. Would you say these principles apply in grant proposal writing, making the funder or grantor the hero of the story?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what's the most powerful thing you can do in grant requests? Learn about the identity of that organization, right? You can look at their documents. They will tell you what their identity is, right? Don't come in with, hey, we're the most wonderful thing ever, therefore you should give us money. Come in with their identity. here is what you are trying to accomplish, right? Here is how we can be an instrument to help you accomplish what you are trying to accomplish, right? So it is the exact same story elements. Corporations have identities. Foundations have identities. They have people. They have values. They have a life story. You use the exact same story elements when you're making your request. Again, our role is as the guiding sage. The nonprofit's role is the magical instrument of impact that helps that prospective hero to complete the journey. And that applies, if anything, even more cleanly when we are doing a grant proposal, because they will literally tell you their identity elements if you care. And you want to show how their identity elements are compelling them to pick up this magical instrument of impact, your nonprofit organization, to make the impact that they want to make because of their identity, their people, values, and life story.
That's great. And thank you everyone for submitting these questions. We're at our time, but this last question is really important, I think, especially for our audience. You referenced job titles. How about for all voluntary organizations that do fundraising? Our board members are well connected and well respected in the community, but they're not employees. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so again, when it comes to the job titles, it's more an idea of understanding how is that perceived from the donor's perspective. I'm not saying everybody needs to change their job titles, because job titles can fulfill a lot of functions. In fact, mostly they are the organization speaking back to the organization, right? But if we are communicating out, then I think what we see is that if we're communicating out that we are here to help donors, that we are here to provide advice and guidance and planning and all of those archetypal character roles, that's attractive. And so understanding that then can inform how we're communicating of, what are we doing here? In the same way, if somebody is fulfilling a different role, maybe they're just somebody else who's on that same journey. I've had years working with this organization to make this impact as a volunteer, and let me tell you about what I have seen, how I have seen people like you make a difference using this organization. So we can apply those story elements, just figure out what character role are you playing, and then communicate something that fits in with that character role in the story.
Thank you so much, Dr. James, and thank you all for attending today. As we mentioned earlier, you can expect a follow-up email, including the slides, the recording, and a link for you to share feedback about today's webinar. For those in the audience, you can also visit dcmp.org for upcoming opportunities, including our annual conference, Nonprofit Day. That's being held on September 24th. The registration deadline is coming up, so we encourage you to RSVP and plan to join us for a full day of training, networking, and professional growth. Thanks again to all who attended, and once more, a big thank you goes to Dr. James for sharing his time and expertise with all of us today. Thank you so much, and take care.